talk about alternative energy sources, especially without fossil fuels. So we've got lots of options, lots of options. We don't need to use coal, oil, and gas. We can use wind, solar, tidal. All of these have energy functions. Hydrogen fuel cells, ocean thermal energy conversion, where the top of the ocean is one temperature, the bottom is a different temperature. The movement of that creates energy. Hydroelectric, geothermal, there's lots of geothermal up by Lake County in California. Waves, currents, all of these are options to us. We have to use all of our tools in the toolbox. So this was stunning to me. I just want you to hear this. Every 2 minutes, the energy reaching the Earth from the sun is equivalent to the whole annual energy usage by humanity. We have an infinite supply of energy, free. Well, not quite free, but all we have to do is harness it. So we've got lots of options here. And the price of solar is dropping dramatically. This is 2014, and going down to 2018. And you can see how much it's dropping. It's continuing to drop every single year because of the production. So back a decade ago, the cost of a solar house facility was about $51,000. And just now, it's about $18,000. But if you take into account the 30% federal tax reduction, it's down to about $12,000, $13,000 for a solar photovoltaic system. About 6 kilowatt system. This is about average for homes. So the California mandate. And last year in May, the California Energy Commission ruled that all new homes after January 1st, 2020, must have solar to supply 100% of the energy in the house. Now there's some offsets that you could use, but this is really amazing advancement. So it's going to add about $9,500 to the cost, but you save almost $20,000 over the life of the system. So let's continue. So that's residential. So this is what we call grid scale for huge communities, regions. So these are trackers. These move 15 to 30 degrees with the tracking of the sun and to pick up the maximum incident radiation. So these are photovoltaic cells, and there's lots of them in Southern California. There's some in other places as well, all around the world. And China is doing huge amounts of photovoltaics, and they're eating our lunch with that. So here's another kind of solar power. I'm not sure how many people know about these. These are called heliostats, or solar power towers. And they're movable mirrors. Every single one of those dots up there is a mirror that's moving. And it's shooting light, reflected light, up to these towers, which are like 500 and 550 feet high. And they're filled with molten salts, liquid sodium, and the sunlight from all of these reflective mirrors heats the molten salts up. And so you don't need the sun to actually create energy, because the molten salts, or the molten sodium, holds the heat overnight. So you can still produce energy by using those molten salts to drive the turbines. So that's an amazing system. So we're getting away from having to have the sun out. So here's a 10 megawatt and a 20 megawatt solar plants in Seville, Spain. Here's a bigger one, 110 megawatts near Tonopah, Nevada. And that can supply 24,000 to 96,000 homes for all of their energy needs. So we're making good progress. Most of these large grid scale operations are in Southern California. The gold ones are the photovoltaics, and the red ones are these solar power towers. And so this particular system is about 23,000 gigawatts, and that can supply electricity for 2.3 million homes. So we're gaining progress. So last year, in March of 2018, the utility grade or grid scale solar energy met 50% of California's total electrical power demand for the first time ever. Now that's not to say that it's doing now. March is a time of year when we don't use as much electricity. So now we're down below that, but it's amazing that we were able to accomplish that that early. And of course, wind is another good option. It's coming up more and more. Wind provides 4.3% of the world's energy, and that's up from 1% in 2006. So dramatic growth in that area. So this is San Gorgonio Pass in Palm Springs, huge wind turbine farm. But you guys probably are more familiar with Altamont Pass as you go down Route 580 towards Livermore. That's a 576 megawatt facility and one of the oldest and largest wind turbine farms in the world. So we're making progress. Mr. Trump seems to have a problem with wind, and his problem is that he said it doesn't blow all the time, and therefore it's a useless utility because it stops sometimes. But the problem is we can't rely on one single issue, one single technology. We have to use wind and solar and all those other tools in our toolbox to accomplish what we need to accomplish. So here's an example in the North Sea. There's tremendous wind farms being developed in the North Sea. This is what you look at. We just came back from the North Sea not long ago. Huge, enormous wind farm. Let me give it a bigger scale on that. So here's the North Sea. Each one of those little red dots is another wind turbine farm out there in the North Sea. And a little closer up, if you can see this, so each one of those little propeller icons is a wind farm. And then the pink area up here are wind farm areas that are already being constructed, and the orange ones up here, if you can see it, are locations where they have permit applications in. So they're just going to fill up the North Sea with these wind farms. Tremendous availability of non-fossil fuel energy coming out. So as you probably know, we are a global leader. AB 32 in 2006, the Global Warming Solutions Act, established a program to reduce California's greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by the year 2020. A decade later, 2016, the Senate Bill 32 was a sister bill of the Global Warming Solutions Act. It went further by reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. So we're making, and we are. So here's the emissions level in 1990, which is what the baseline is. That was 433 million metric tons of CO2. That's what California produced. But in 2016, the carbon emissions fell to 429 million metric tons. So therefore, California beat its own 2020 goals for cutting greenhouse gases a full 4 years before the target date of 2020. Fantastic accomplishment. Okay, let's talk about transportation. Transportation accounts for about 40% of the emissions, the carbon emissions in California, only about 30% in the US. That's because we have a lot more cars than the other places in the US. And globally, only 14%. So let's see what's happening with cars. So here's countries that are banning gas cars. They've announced in these years, 2017 to 2019, all of these countries, and they're planning to implement by these years somewhere between 2025 and 2050. So there's moves afoot, they're making these resolutions, and they're setting out to solve the transportation component of the emissions. In January 2018, California had a bill, AB 1745, to ban all new vehicles fueled by internal combustion engines by 2040. That did not pass. So we're still waiting to get something going in terms of banning internal combustion engines. So there's resolutions that have been passed in the United States, reducing vehicle CO2 emissions to 0 by 2040 to 2050 in California, Connecticut, Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island. We need a lot more states to chip in, but that's what's happening so far. And if you want to solve the problem, you can have your sweetheart buy you a Tesla. Cindy, where are you? And if you don't want to do that, or your sweetheart doesn't want to do that, you can go to this site called What EV to Buy. So what electric vehicle do you want to buy? And this is what the site used to look like. It gives you how many miles per battery charge, and then it gives you also the cost of the vehicles, like Teslas, and we're way out there. But you can either get a totally battery-driven electric vehicle, or a plug-in hybrid, or a fuel cell electric vehicle. So whatever, I mean, there's every single manufacturer of cars has electric vehicles of one sort or another. And they're getting better and better, and the better mileage every single year. So go to this site, what EV to buy, if you're thinking of purchasing an electric style vehicle, or a plug-in, or a hybrid. That will give you all of the information. This one was for 2018, but they're now on their website. They have for 2020, 21, and 22, all the vehicles that are coming up in the future. So look at it and buy your electric car. Not only is Tesla selling and making cars, they're also selling, and I'm not sure how many people probably know, you know this, they're making semi-trucks. And here's an example of one of them. Elon Musk has a nice unveiling of one of these on the web. And so because Elon likes speed, you know he likes speed, the cab here goes 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. With the trailer, it goes 0 to 60 in 20 seconds. Can you imagine that, going down the drag strip? So Tesla is not the only manufacturer of these big electric semis. There's all kinds of manufacturers out there, Daimler, Chrysler, Cummins, Nikola, or Walmart's making one. And they're using these for truck farms. So you have a truck farm here and a truck farm there, and go between point A and point B, plug it in, recharge it, go from point B to back to point A, recharge it. There's no use of fossil fuels there, at least in the engines. So they're all electric. And they're going autonomous. Now, this one here bothers me. I'm not sure what I would do if I saw that thing coming down the road at me. And it's autonomous. There's no driver. So, take your pick. Oh, the military's on it. Now we got to talk about the military. Military is building electric vehicles all over the place. They've been understanding what's happening in global climate change for decades, and they're sort of behind the radar. They're not really explaining or propagating what they're really doing. So they've got hybrid tanks. They've got people movers. They've got Bradley fighting vehicles. All these things, fuel trucks, and a lot of them are hybrids or pure electric. Now, the Bradley fighting vehicle, they're making one right now that's going to be purely electric, so that it's totally silent, and they're going to be able to sneak up on their enemies without making any noise. That's true. It's not out yet, but it's coming. So I want to show you a film clip from a movie called The Burden, which talks about what the military is doing to avoid using fossil fuels because it's so costly. I hope it works. You hear that?
I went to West Point. I studied a lot of highly skilled, advanced training. And when we got to Iraq, I was appalled at how little of it we actually employed. And just how much time was wasted on getting and protecting fuel.
We spend a lot of resources just moving fuel throughout the battlefield.
Everything they do relies on fuel.
The overdependence on fuels is affecting our environment.
The burden on the military will increase as they're forced to respond because they are the best first responders in the world.
One of the reasons why we're in the Persian Gulf is to maintain the stability of oil.
Every time the price goes up so sharply, it does economic damage. Oil we use puts money in the hands of some countries that are problems for us.
The consumption of oil is a national security issue.
Heat, lights, vehicles going up, fuel's the lifeblood, and without fuel, these guys be sitting ducks.
In the next 10 years, the Air Force Academy plans to generate all of their own electricity through renewable sources.
There's a huge potential for the armed forces to be an innovation pull in energy.
Americans by nature, it's in our DNA to look for the next frontier.
We can prevent future generations from having to be deployed for fossil fuel.
Using these technologies is providing great value to the taxpayers.
How much more powerful would it be if we had sources of energy that weren't geographically dependent?
We break free of oil. We'd say to the Middle East, see if you can drink that stuff.
If we apply it in energy, we win the triple play of this American century. We improve the national security, create jobs, and we clean up the air. It's not a cost, it's an investment.
The military is on it. They know what they're doing. They know what they need to do to solve these problems, and they know what to do to get away from fossil fuels. They're approaching a lot of different alternative energy sources, and I'm going to go over some more of those in a second. But ferry lines are basically the same thing as truck farms. Point A to point B, back and forth, plug them in at each end, no fossil fuels used. Today there's over 100 hybrid ships worldwide, and they're increasing all the time. So progress is being made. Locally, the Alcatraz ferry has been doing this for a long time. They have photoelectric cells on the top of Alcatraz itself, being able to plug in and fuel the ferries when they get there. And the ferries have actually photoelectric cells on their roof, as well as wind turbines up there as well. So the entire fleet now is all electric. And back to the military. This is the Navy's first hybrid drive warship, the USS Macon Island. It's a WASP-class amphibious assault ship, and they call it the Prius of the Navy. Launched in 2009, and then sort of rebuilt in 2011. And this one here is a hybrid guided missile destroyer, USS Truxtun. So they're doing all this with foresight. I mean, these things don't get built overnight. They've been working on this for decades, so they know what they're doing. Unfortunately, March 2018, President Trump's budget for 2019 canceled a program to install fuel-efficient hybrid electric drives in 34 destroyers. We're going in the wrong direction there, folks. And the ultimate test, the ultimate challenge is to build electric planes. Tough, but this particular air company, Harbor Air in Vancouver, British Columbia, plans to be the first all-electric airline. They go on 30 to 60-mile jaunts, bringing tourists and fishermen and other people up there. But they're experimenting with 350, 500, and 750 horsepower electric engines, which they can recharge at the other end, sort of like a ferry or a truck farm. And Airbus is moving in that direction. They have a competition out right now to see who can build the most efficient airplane, all right, electric airplane. So we're moving there. Air traffic, air transportation only accounts for about 2 to 3% of our global carbon dioxide emissions, but every bit counts. We'll be way ahead if we start to be able to develop electric airplanes. So next, in terms of solutions, geoengineering solutions to lower the concentration of atmospheric CO2. So here's the best one of all, a tree. It's the most efficient one we've got. And the more trees you plant, the better we're going to be in terms of taking carbon dioxide out of the air. And we also have what's called direct air capture. We have to remove this stuff. We have to back it out, reverse the process of emitting CO2 and put them back into the smokestacks, not literally. But this process of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, remember I mentioned carbon dioxide is going to last for 500 to 1,000 or maybe longer years. We need to get that stuff out. So here's an example. This company is called Global Thermostat, and they have 2 different locations, Menlo Park and Huntsville, Alabama, and they're using solids to take out the carbon dioxide. These are all prototype. There's nothing they're functional, but they're all in prototype mode. CO2 capture from the air was first developed by Nazi scientists who used liquid sorbents to remove accumulations of CO2 in submarines. So this is kind of where it all started. But these guys are making progress. Here's another company, Carbon Engineering in Canada, and they're using liquids instead of solids. And here's a prototype arrangement here. The problem with these are that these big fans have to blow the air by this liquid material, and it just takes a huge amount of energy. So we don't want to be creating carbon dioxide in order to be taking it out. But as we develop more and more of the alternative energy sources, wind, solar, all these other sources, hydroelectric, we could possibly, run all of these on alternative energy sources and then be pulling that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It's a long way down the road, but we're hoping that we can do something like this. We need to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And here's 7 different companies that are working on this direct air capture prototype facilities. New York City, Wisconsin, Switzerland, Italy, Canada, Netherlands. So they're all out there trying their best to make this happen. 50 years ago, Apollo 11, one small step for man. This program has a soft spot in my heart, partly because one of my cousins was an astronaut in the Apollo program. You may have heard the name Gene Cernan, but he was the last man to walk on the moon. But more so, I was impressed with what JFK had to say about the moon program. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to do this not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win. We are there now with climate change. We can do this, and we need to do this. So the tools to do the moonshot did not exist at that time. It took NASA 8 years and 400,000 people to literally invent the rocket, the spaceship that could land on the moon, the spacesuits, etc. All of that had to be invented from scratch. However, today we're in a different situation. An iPhone has more processing power than every NASA computer excuse me, in existence in the early 1960s. We have the technology to do this. We have the computing power. We have the will. We have the scientific know-how. So we need to do it. What we don't have is the political will. Okay, remember this guy? James Hansen? Congress, 1988. Who's this guy? George H.W. Bush. Also in 1988, George W. Bush was on his presidential campaign, and his slogan was, "We'll fix the global warming effect with the White House effect." So he was claiming he's going to fix global warming, and if we started in 1988, we would be there. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. He got into power. He served from 1989 to 1993. He was an oil man. He owned his own oil company as well. And unfortunately, once he got into power, once he was inaugurated, that promise sort of fell away. And at the same time, Exxon and several other oil companies, they knew exactly what these greenhouse warming gases were, and they knew what they were doing, and they knew that we were going to be increasing the temperature of the Earth. They kept it from the public, they kept it to themselves, and only recently did they admit that they had those back in the 70s. So we need to solve this problem, and at this point in time, 1988, which we talked about before, this was probably the time when global warming and climate change became political, because the oil companies were controlling this resource, and they didn't want to lose the profits, and so they said nothing for decades and decades. So let's take a look at what's happening politically. This is a figure from the Yale Center for Climate Change Communication, Director Anthony Weiserowitz, and this is a majority of registered voters, what they think about global warming and it's caused by human activities. So the top line is a line, this is from 2008 to 2018, pretty much the last decade. The blue line is representing liberal Democrats. The gray line below that is moderate to conservative Democrats. The pink line is liberal to moderate Republicans, and the red line is conservative Republicans. So over time, hasn't changed much, but you can see it's increasing. More and more people are believing that, and the black line is the average of all of them. So right now, 59% of all the registered voters that they were polling believe that climate change is real, global warming is real, and mostly caused by humans. What are we going to do with that? The top one, 84% of the liberal Democrats believe that it's, human activities. 26% of the conservative Republicans believe that, but we've got a large gap between those. And back in 2016, in the election, climate change was like the 15th or 20th item on people's concern list of concerns. Right now, it's in the top 3. And that's primarily because people are getting hit with this climate change stuff. Their houses are burning down, their houses are getting flooded. They're feeling the effects of climate change. So they're more inclined to voice their opinion and try to do something about it, maybe vote for candidates who are really going to try to solve the problem. So going back a little bit to 2015, President Obama was a leader. He brought 194 countries together to formulate the Paris Climate Accord, or climate agreement. There were 2 countries that didn't sign on initially. It was Syria, because they were in the midst of a war, and Nicaragua, because Nicaragua didn't think we were doing enough with the Paris Agreement. So a year later, the Paris Climate Accord was ratified, and both Syria and Nicaragua joined. Okay, so we've got 196 countries, and unfortunately, the very next year, 2017, Trump administration is pulling out of the Paris Accord. We need a global leader to bring these countries together again. There is not one right now. We need a global leader that's going to work hard to solve this climate crisis that we're in. November 4th, last week, was the first day that Trump was able to officially, legally, start pulling out of the climate accord. He filed the papers for that, and 1 year from November 4th, in 2020, we will be out of the climate accord, officially. I mean, it doesn't make much difference because we're not doing anything in the United States anyway to support it. However, here's some politicians discussing global warming. That's kind of depressing. However, the good news is that over 6,000 companies in 7,000 cities in 133 countries are implementing the greenhouse gas emissions reduction protocols despite what we're doing and following the Paris Agreement. So there's lots of good news out here. Many of our states are doing it, many of our cities are doing it, many of our corporations are doing it. So yay for them. So where do we go from here? Well, what's the real bottom line? Again, we need to use all the tools in our toolbox. We need to engage the federal government, the states, the cities, the corporations, the NGOs, the individuals. We need to eliminate the use of fossil fuels. We need to reduce CO2 emissions in all ways possible, remove CO2 from the atmosphere, direct air capture, increase energy efficiency in all ways, enact regulations to reduce carbon emissions, put a price on carbon, support research and development, provide subsidies for innovative ideas, and act to protect our future generations, our kids, their kids, and their kids, and on and on. Okay, here's the biggest graph of the whole afternoon. You put on your thinking caps, and I'm going to walk you through this. This is 1980 up to 2100. Here's James Hansen right here. 1988 gave us the warning. This black line is the concentration of CO2, it's the emissions of CO2 increasing. So here's the year 2000. If we started in the year 2000 to start reducing our emissions, this is a model run, we would follow this yellow line and it would bring us down to where we need to be in 2100. We would only have to have reduced our emissions by 2% per year. We didn't do that. Now we're up here at 2019, almost 2020. We still haven't done it. So starting in 2019, we would have had to start reducing our emissions by 5% per year. That's a good amount, a tough amount. But since we haven't done that, there's 10 dots here, would bring us over to 2030. We don't have that long. 2030, we would have to reduce our emissions by 9% per year. That's tough. That's really tough. We need to start immediately starting to reduce our emissions and doing everything possible to pull CO2 out of the air and to stop it from existing in the first place. So that's the main dictate, is that we need to work quickly. I mean, we can't start in 2030. We need to be well along the way by 2030. So California, and at the federal level, there's a bill called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act of 2019. We've got 57 Democrats co-sponsoring and 1 Republican. But basically, this is the one that's moved the fastest, or moved the furthest along the process. They're in committees now discussing it. There's 7 different carbon pricing bills in the legislature. Not one of them has been voted on. And the Citizens Climate Lobby, represented in the back with Edith Thatcher, is representing Citizens Climate Lobby here. They are supporting that bill. Okay, it's called the Carbon Fee and Dividend Bill. Citizens Climate Lobby has over 100,000 people worldwide. Jim Hansen is one of them. And Catherine Hayhoe, who just gave a talk at Davis, one of the world's leading climatologists. The Citizens Climate Lobby sent 800 CCL members to Congress last week. No, it was this week, wasn't it? Yes. And they had 472 appointments with legislators or their staff to try to move this bill forward. So before you leave, I invite you to take a look in the back table. There's Citizens Climate Lobby information there. And think about signing up. So kind of winding it up, again, we need to use all the tools in our toolbox, everything: electric planes, tanks, cars, direct air capture, grid scale battery storage, which we haven't talked about, but is coming onto the landscape here really soon. I mean, there's battery power grid scale now, but it's just in its infancy. And legislation, put a price on carbon. One of the other things we need to deal with is the fuel industry subsidies for 191 countries. Coal and oil gets 85% of the subsidies. In 2017, there was $5.2 trillion, that's with a T, trillion dollars in coal and oil subsidies, oil, coal, and gas. 6.5% of global GDP. The largest subsidies are being given by China, 1.4 trillion. Largest subsidies, second largest subsidies are for the US, 650 billion. India, third. And so how are we going to change this? If we use just a tiny, small fraction of the subsidy money and put it towards alternative energy, we could be making huge progress. So how are we going to make a change? Make no mistake, public opinion is everything. I've talked to many legislators and their staffs, and they all tell me the same thing. Every piece of information they get, whether it be a tweet, an email, a postcard, anything, phone call, they register that opinion. And they believe that that piece of information represents somewhere between 100 and 1,000 other individuals who would never think of contacting their members of Congress. That's powerful. People out there demonstrating in the streets. Power in numbers, power in speaking your mind. So this is a grassroots group that my wife Cindy and I started a couple of years ago. And what we do is we write postcards. Last year we wrote 3,500 postcards. And I made a little calculation here, 3,500 times 1,000, that's 3.5 million pieces of information that were received by members of Congress, either in the state or the federal government, to thank them for things that they're doing right, or abuse them for things they're doing wrong. But you can see these people are writing postcards. Most of them are. What's this guy over here doing? I'm not quite sure. Anyway, most of them are writing postcards. And this was just this last week we were writing postcards. So start or join a grassroots group, and your opinion is worth a lot, every single one of you. Think about this, 300 people in the room times 1,000 is same thing. Also, personal responsibilities. each one of you can do things at your home or in your lifestyle that change the carbon dioxide that you're emitting. I have flyers in the back. They're color green like this. Yep. And they have energy product consumption. They have water and vegetation, transportation, foods, lots of things. Plant trees, eliminate single-use items. Everything you buy, everything you use has a carbon footprint. So on the back of that sheet is the reasons why you should be doing each one of these things as well. And it's listed on my website, tomsuchanek.net, if you lose it. So please pick up a handout in the back. And most critical actions, for those a little off here, educate yourself and your tribe meaning the people you hang out with, the people that do the same things that you do. So educate your friends, educate your frenemies. Communicate with your members of Congress. That's what we were just talking about. And if you're uncertain about it, talk to us and we can help you to formulate a grassroots group. And the most important thing of all, vote in all local, state, and national elections. For those who will try to work hard to solve this crisis. So, I'm going to ask you a question. If there were an initiative on climate change, how many people do you think here would be interested in joining that initiative? Anybody? Well, there's only about 200 out of the 300. Okay. That's good news. You make a difference out there. So we'll get back to you on that. And I think at this point, we're going to just jump back into the questions. Thank you.
All those wind farms in the North Sea,
Yes.
in the ocean,
Yep.
what kind of protections for sea life is there, for marine life?
I don't think there's much. I mean, they're just anchored there. I don't think there's much that's happening. All the movement is up above.
Louder!
So clearly there was some disruption when they put them in, but I'm not aware of any major disruptions that I've heard of after their work.
I mean, the blades are above the ocean surface, so there's not much disruption to the marine life.
Have the electrical conduits going back in there.
How about the chemical reactions, whatever covering the towers and all that?
The chemical reaction of what's covering the towers. I think they're probably pretty, it might be stainless steel or plastic or something, I'm not sure. Next. Yes, Jack.
Well, you mentioned a couple of the alternative energy sites. One of them being Ivanpah,
Yes.
which is really environmentally destructive.
In what way?
And the other being Altamont, which also environmentally destructive to the birds. We've lost a lot of migrating birds because of Altamont. Ivanpah, of course, they just scrape the desert clean, scrape all the wildlife burrows and the tortoises off. So what do we do to mitigate those things? We can't just be building all these things and say the desert and, oh, well, the desert is worth something. These people don't believe it's worth anything. The problem is it is worth something. It's part of our ecology. We can't get rid of that.
Completely agree. And there are disruptions that occur when they're putting these in. It's a trade-off. Everything's a trade-off. But in terms of the Altamont Pass, there's studies going on in terms of how much distance they should have between the turbines, and even painting the blades different colors and different stripes to make the blades more visible to birds, to predator birds. So they're trying. They've been working on this for about 10 years, and there's other wind farm experiments going on to eliminate the blades altogether, but just to have these spiral wind blades that go around like this instead of around like this. So they're working on the technology. They know that there's some disruption involved. We have to find a way that meets both of those criteria.
It's also important to bear in mind, yes, we're minimizing that, but it's important to bear in mind we have to get our energy from somewhere, and oil spills and blowing up mountains to get coal is much more disruptive than solar installation in one location.
I recently read an article about a fellow in England named Trevor Jackson, and he claims to have developed an air aluminum or aluminum air battery, which apparently could take a car like 1,500 miles using some electrolyte. Are you aware of that, and is it real?
Yeah, I haven't heard of that particular technology. I mean, I'm always skeptical. There's always new stories of this new technology. I mean, until it kind of comes to market and proves that it can be done affordably and cost effectively, then I'd remain skeptical. But if they can make that happen, that's great. Until it happens, we'll see what we believe in.
Right here.
You haven't mentioned nuclear. Are there no safe options under development?
Nuclear is still, in my opinion, nuclear is still not viable simply because, number one, you have the waste that needs to be stored someplace, and that waste is often radioactive for 250,000 years. So we need to find a really solid place to store that, or isolate it. And second of all, the risk of it failing, either through a terrorist operation or a natural event like happened in Fukushima, is still a risk. And so for those two reasons, I feel really uncertain about supporting nuclear. We have some other.
Yeah, I mean, we're saying that groups are working on developing like next generation nuclear using thorium and like they reuse the fuel rods, and so it has less of a waste concern. So yeah, it's something we're working on developing. It's just we're not there yet.
Next.
I had a question on fuel cells. I didn't see those mentioned up there, hydrogen fuel cells. It seems like 10 or 15 years ago, there were experiments with some building-sized fuel cells that could be set up burning hydrogen for electricity to power plants and things like that, like sewer treatment plants. Has there been any progress on that?
Yeah, there's been some progress. So building-sized fuel cells, and also I think for like a large ship transportation, fuel cells are kind of promising. So it's kind of progressing slowly. Like there was for a while there was kind of some focus on trying to get fuel cells for passenger cars, and that kind of just got bypassed by electric cars because it's more efficient to use the electricity just to charge the battery directly than to use the electricity to make hydrogen in the fuel cell. But so it's better for large-scale applications like buildings or like big ships. So it's progressing. It hasn't been deployed very much yet.
This will be our last question. We promised we would get you out at 5. So our last question. And Tom, they will stay around if you'd like to ask questions afterwards with them.
Is there a market for the old Prius batteries? We heard that there's still a lot of life left in batteries when they can no longer power the cars, and they can be used in conjunction with solar.
Yeah, I know there's been talk of using old EV batteries for storage for electricity from the grid. I don't know if anybody's doing it yet, but it's kind of thing that we're looking into. Like once there are a lot of old Prius batteries, then there will be enough scale so that can be like a viable option. But I haven't heard of anybody doing it yet.
Thank you so much. And Tom, emergency fund for the students at Sac State in Tom's State. So Tom, thank you.
Yeah, so if anybody else wants to ask questions, feel free to come up and talk to us.